Good morning, Doug.
Dang it. Hey,
That good old mute button, huh?
I know.
Happy Friday to you.
Same to you. How you doing?
I'm good. I'll do just a few moments and then I'll introduce you. Some brief comments.
I think we already got a host of people in here.
Yeah, looks
Welcome,
like
everybody.
it.
Thanks for attending.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for being on time.
Yeah.
Good morning. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself out for a moment and just check in with a few colleagues, Doug.
Sounds good.
Good morning, Ginger.
Good morning.
Hey, Sherry, good morning.
Good morning.
Hello, Tina. Hey, how are you?
Fine, and you?
Good to see you.
I know, right?
I know. I can't wait to see all my great colleagues. It's been challenging. I'm such an extrovert.
I know, right?
Mm-hmm. So we're going to get started, colleagues, right at 10 a.m. I want to make sure to be respectful of everyone's time. So I know that we've got just a few minutes and then we'll get started. Good morning, colleagues. For those of you just joining us, we are going to get started in about 3 minutes. It looks like people are still logging on, and we want to also be respectful of time, so we'll start right at 10 a.m. Good morning, colleagues. It is 10 a.m. and so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I wanted to first ask everyone to make sure to mute themselves. We are on a meeting call, so if you have your audio on, everyone will hear you, and this is a recording. Thank you so much, colleagues, for joining us on this Friday before the Super Bowl, during the Olympic Games, and just a great time to gather. I hope you all are doing well and in good health. My name is Tina Jackson. I serve as Assistant Commissioner of Workforce Education. And I'm going to just share a brief amount of comments, and then we're going to go right into the program today. As Commissioner Keller mentioned during his State of Higher Education address, Texas was one of very few states that prioritized discretionary federal stimulus funds through the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund for Higher Education, also known as GEER. Working with Texas institutions, we have deployed millions of dollars in emergency financial aid to help more than 60,000 students stay on track and avoid dropping out. We were awarded grants to public and private colleges and universities to accelerate digital learning. This work by teams of faculty innovators in rapidly expanding the state library of open educational resources available at no cost to students, which includes exciting new collaborations among our colleges and universities to share and enhance digital content they use to support faculty. GEER funding is also providing seed funding to community colleges and universities to rapidly expand short-term credentials that align with regional state workforce needs. And I'm going to just share with you what those current GEER grant awards are. We have the Rescaling Rounds 1, 2, and 3. We have the True Institutional Capacity Grant. the Texas Completion Repayment Grant, the Work-Based Learning Internships and Apprenticeship Program, the Reporting Modernization Grant, Accelerating Credentials of Purpose and Value, and the Open Educational Resource Course Development and Implementation. Now I would like to introduce my colleague, Doug Brock, who serves as Assistant General Counsel for the Coordinating Board and who will be presenting the next couple of slides. Doug, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Tina, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending. As Tina stated, I am Assistant General Counsel for the Coordinating Board. And what I want to share with you today really is provide you assistance in understanding the legal framework of these GEER funds, and then go into, basically how can you appropriately use these funds to meet your program needs. What I'm going to provide you today is not legal advice. It's for informational purposes only. If you have specific legal questions, you should always direct those to your own institution's legal counsel. But what we want to do is walk through that, and then we've set up a number of scenarios to give you common scenarios that may come up with use of funds, and then kind of have you brainstorm and then provide you the answers on how these scenarios are handled. We'll then move into the kind of the monitoring requirements, why those monitoring requirements are so important, and then what if you need to make changes to your program, specifically your budget, how does that work? How do you go about it? And then we're going to try to leave quite a substantial amount of time for questions at the end. So really appreciate your attendance. And Sherry, if you want, Ginger, if you want to move on to the next slide. So I'm going to specifically talk about the legal framework for these GEER funds. And so any federal award comes from statutory authority. In this case, it is the Federal CARES Act, which I'm sure you've heard the term CARES a lot. It actually stands for Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act. The GEER provisions are specifically found in section 18002 of that act and in section 18003. 18003D specifically lists all the allowable uses for this fund. They're quite extensive. So from the statutory authority, you then have federal regulations. And while there are no specific federal regulations related directly to GEER, you are required to follow the Uniform Grant Guidance, which are the federal regulations surrounding any use of a federal grant award. And that's important to note here. All these funds are federal dollars and is federally funded. So the Uniform Grant Guidance can be found in 2 CFR 200. I have a link there, but you can easily just, search for the Uniform Grant Guidance and you can make it into the actual regulations there. They're very informative. They're fairly easy to understand. Underneath the regulations is the actual grant award. And what's unique about this award is that the award is actually between the U.S. Department of Education and the governor of the state of Texas. And this is how every GEER award is done throughout the United States. The award is actually to the governor's office. From there, the governor decides who to subgrant that money out to. He subgranted some of those awards to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. And so what we've done is we've taken those funds and we've had numerous RFAs and other grant opportunities to provide subawards out to institutions for those programs that Tina went over. So this is a legal framework all these sit in. And actually the way to think about it is kind of from the bottom up. So in terms of what you have to comply with, the first step is your subaward requirements. From there would be the subgrant requirements from the federal U.S. Department of Education to the governor, and then the federal regulations, and then the statutory framework. So Ginger, if you want to go to the next slide, this helps explain it more. And so went with a strong Olympic themes because I love the Olympics and we're in the middle of Olympics right now. And I feel like the Winter Olympics get short shrift a lot of time. But they are pretty amazing because it's some crazy sports. You think about some of the things these people do, they're quite intense and they require a lot of navigation, review, and figuring out, okay, what is the fastest, easiest way down that slope. And that's kind of, what you have to do with using these funds is that there's several steps you should take along before you start using the funds. There's several things you should be doing. First and foremost is you get these RFAs, review them. Review what's in the RFA, what those requirements are. And I know it's usually it's fast and furious. The RFAs go out, you have to apply for the funds, that happens really quickly. But those RFAs are always available. They live on the THECB website. You should maintain a copy of them as well because they have a lot of terms and conditions in there that you need to make sure you're complying with. So keep that, refer back to it all the time. The other key piece of that is your submitted application. So what did you actually apply for? Sometimes you get in the weeds of the program and you need to go back and remind yourself, okay, what was actually in our application? What did we say we were going to do? What were the goals? How were we going to use the funds? So always use those as your kind of anchors. The next key piece is the notice of grant award. And so when we give out the award, and this is generally, but you have the RFA, there's the application, and then you receive the notice of grant award. That's actually the binding agreement. And typically what that says is that, congratulations, you've got the award. Coordinating board signed off on this. We need you to sign it. And now you have a binding grant agreement. If there's any additional terms, it will be in that NOGA. And that NOGA is short for Notice of Grant Award. That will also state that the RFA and your institution submitted application is part of that agreement. So those three documents are crucial for understanding what you can and can't do with the grant award. And part of that's also, well, what did you say you were going to do with this grant award? What did we agree to with you that you could use this for? You also want to always be mindful of what are the eligibility requirements for the use of funds. That's always in the RFA. And then from there, you want to understand any specific program regulations regarding allowable and unallowable costs in that grant. So once again, that's going to be in the RFA or the grant agreement. And then also the way the Uniform Grant Guidance works is that it allows for a federal grant program to provide specific exemptions or changes from the Uniform Grant Guidance. And we'll go into that a little bit more deeply, but you always have to be aware of, okay, are there any specific requirements for the use of this grant fund? The GEER grant funds broadly are to help with, immediate needs related to coronavirus and all of the outcomes that that has had. So, economic, getting people back to school, digital learning, those all fit. Then the other key piece, and this is the most important, is that you want to regularly document your progress in the use of your funding. That is crucial. And, towards the end, we're going to talk about what happens if you don't do that. But if you do it along the way, it makes your life a lot easier. It makes our life a lot easier. Because remember, everything that you do, we have to report back up that chain. So we have to report everything back to the governor. The governor has to report back to the Department of Education. So this isn't something that we're fully in control in. These are federal funds that flow through the governor. So just be aware of that chain. And if you want to move on to the next slide. So let's go over some general principles that have to be met for a cost to be allowable. We're going to go into more about, okay, what is an allowable or unallowable cost, but the first key questions are these. What are the general principles that need to be met? Sorry, I need to mute my email. I got a ton coming in right now. So to be allowable, the first key thing, does it align with the grant award terms and conditions and your application? That's crucial. Like if it doesn't align with the grant, it's not allowable. Second is you have to, as an institution, you have to consistently categorize the costs across awards. So you can't, if you have most institutions have multiple funding sources from the federal government. You can't change how you categorize costs from one federal program to another. They have to be consistent. And you should have internal policies and procedures for that, but just make sure you're following them. And that goes to the next one. You always have to comply with your established policies and procedures. You can't use these you can't use federal grant funds to go beyond what's allowed in your policies and procedures. For example, those usually around pay, around fringe benefits, you can't offer more than what's allowed by your institution. You always have to adhere to generally accepted accounting principles. That's for any federal award. And then you can't include other federally funded programs in matching or in-kind contributions. So, I know there's right now, very few of our awards require any kind of match or in-kind contributions, but some do. And you can't use other federally funded programs as part of a match or in-kind contribution. That will get you in trouble with the federal government. And then finally, and this is the most key, and this is a question you should always ask. So, you have a cost, it falls within the award terms and conditions, you've done everything else, but the key question is the cost necessary, reasonable, or allocable for the grant project? And the first two are the most important. Is it reasonable or is it necessary? If it doesn't meet that, then it's not an appropriate use of grant funds. So necessary is defined in the Uniform Grant Guidance as necessary to complete the activities within the grant. Like you have to do it, has to be done. Reasonable is defined as a cost that if in its nature or amount, it does not exceed that which would be incurred by a prudent person under the circumstances prevailing at the time the decision was made to incur the cost. So it has to be prudent, it has to be reasonably related, and it can't exceed what you would normally spend on something like that. So you have to be fiscally conservative in the use of these funds. And then finally, it can be allocable, which means it can be traced to specific activities of a grant project. And the costs have to be in accordance with the benefits received. So this comes into play, not solely, but where you usually see this is time and effort for employee use of time. So you have, faculty members, for example, and they, have a salary of $100,000, but they're only working on the project 10% of the time. You cannot charge their entire $100,000 salary as a cost for the grant. Why? Because they're not spending 100% of time on the grant. You can charge 10% of it if their work is reasonable or necessary for it, and the $100,000 falls within your salary structure at the university, then you can charge up to 10% because that's the amount of effort that they are using on that grant project. All right, next slide, please. So you have those reasonable, necessary, and allocable definitions, and those are kind of guiding. Now, if you go to the Uniform Grant Guidance, and specifically in sections 420 through 475, this is where you're going to find specifically set out by the federal government what are allowable and unallowable costs in a grant. They've broken it down into 54 different cost categories. And this is always a good thing to have bookmarked in your web browser, just to reference. It's a good reference point. But you always have to keep in mind that the specific federal program laws or regulations allow for deviation on these allowable and unallowable costs. And you're going to find within those cost categories, there is a subset that require prior written approval to be used. And so we're going to go through some of those more common ones, but just because it says it's allowable or unallowable in the Uniform Grant Guidance does not necessarily mean it is. Just important to note, once again, that's why you always go back to your RFA, your agreement with us or whoever the federal funding, wherever the federal fundings are coming from, to see what is allowable or unallowable, because that's your agreement. But at all times, you also have to maintain compliance with Uniform Grant Guidance.
Can we just pause for a moment, Doug? Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Please, as a courtesy, make sure you're on mute. We're hearing some background noise, so if everyone would take a moment to check and make sure that they are on mute, we'd appreciate it. Doug, if you'd like, I can stop showing my screen and then turn everyone on mute.
Yeah, would you do that, please?
Sure. All right.
Thank you. All right, you can go on to the next slide. So as I stated, there are some cost categories that require prior written approval from the grantor. And remember, for the GEER funds, we're not the grantor. That's actually the U.S. Department of Education and the governor. So some of the categories where prior written approval is always required: purchase of real property, equipment and capital equipment. That includes new construction, remodeling, entertainment and travel costs, program income, and pre-award costs. The entire list of what's required for prior written approval is in 200.407 for your reference. So of these, for GEER grant awards, the Department of Education has provided prior written approval within the GEER award to all the governors for pre-award costs dating back to March 13, 2020, which was when the federal disaster declaration regarding COVID-19 came out. So for that, that's the limit on prior written approval under GEER. And so in any other GEER awards, please be aware that the coordinating board does not have authority to give prior written approval for any of these cost categories. That would have to come from the Department of Education or from the governor of Texas. And you'll see in some of the RFAs, it does specifically allow for pre-award costs because we do have that prior written approval. All right, next slide. So what I want to do now is I want to turn this over to some of our staff who have been running these GEER projects with y'all, helping you through them. And at this time, I want to introduce Dr. Michel Singh, Assistant Commissioner for digital learning, who has been doing an amazingly stellar job, as have all these folks on, getting these grant programs off the ground, assisting y'all. And she's been simply working on the OER grants. Michelle?
Thank you, Doug, and thank you to everyone for actively paying attention. And now comes the fun part. I realize my camera is getting a little excited and gets a little fuzzy at times, but now comes the fun part. Now comes the assessment part, right? That's what everybody's excited about. We are going to go through scenarios. These are not for a grade, and we are not keeping track on who answers correctly or who does not, but we would love for you to participate in this process. So on the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a reactions tool that you can use. If you would like to participate, we'd love to go through a scenario, and if you think the answer is yes, this is allowable, give us a thumbs up or an applause sign. And if you don't believe it's allowable, then don't do anything. We realize by default, it's going to be a don't allowable, but that's not the case. Please be as interactive as you can. And we appreciate the questions coming in the chat. We'll get to those as we continue. So is everybody ready for your first scenario? Let's try this interactive part. Reactions, thumbs up. Yes, everyone's ready for the first scenario? I'm seeing maybe a couple. Here comes some more. All right, I'm going to say we've got the reaction tool ready and set to go. Here we go with scenario number 1. An institution wants to use a GEER grant award to pay fringe benefits for its part-time staff who are assisting in pandemic recovery efforts. The institution does not generally pay fringe benefits for part-time staff. Is this allowable? Thumbs up, yes. Thumbs down, no. What do we think? So let's start off with one that has multiple layers, right? So the fringe benefit part of this scenario is generally allowable according to section 200.431. However, because we are focused on treating these situations consistently with university practice or institutional practice, that is where there is a difference of opinion. See 200.403 for that. So if generally the institution does not pay for fringe benefits for part-time staff, then that falls in the not allowable category. All right, we're doing well. Everybody kicked off strong. Now we're ready to go on to our next scenario that will be presented by Dr. Kyla Torre, Director in the Division of Digital Learning.
Hello, everyone. All right, so next scenario, here we go. An institution received a GEER grant award to assist students to obtain employment in their degree field. The institution wants to use grant funds to become a member of a national association for career counselors so they can have access to up-to-date career service innovations. Do we think this is allowable? Any ideas? All right, I got a thumbs up, I got a thumbs down. All right, well, yes, this is in fact allowable. Membership, subscription, and professional cost activities are generally allowable, so long as the primary purpose of that association is not lobbying. And you can see 200.454 for more information about that. So I'm going to turn it over for our next scenario to Sherry Reynes, who's our Assistant Director in Workforce Education and a project manager for many of your grants.
Hi, good evening, everybody, or good morning, everybody. Sorry, you can tell I'm already confused. So our next scenario is this one, and we're looking for your reactions again. An institution received a GEER grant award for recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. All of our GEER awards are supposed to be for COVID-19 pandemic recovery. A student sues your institution over its mask mandate and remote instruction decisions on constitutional grounds. The institution decides to settle the case out of court and wants to use a portion of the grant funds to do so. Is this allowable? What do y'all think? I'm seeing a bit of a mix. So the answer is no. Costs including settlement costs that result from a violation or an alleged violation of a law or regulations are unallowable. You can't use your GEER funding for this. There is one exception, that is if the cost is incurred as a result of complying with specific provisions of the grant award or with prior written approval of the U.S. Department of Education. but generally speaking, this is not allowable. And the citation is 200.435. I'm now going to turn this over to Dr. Ginger Gossman, who's a senior director with our Academic Affairs and Workforce Education Division. Ginger?
Thank you, Sherry. Hi, everyone. Here is your scenario. A group of faculty want to use funds from a GEER grant award to travel to peer institutions to collaborate on developing short-term credentials. Is this an allowable cost? Now, Sherry, can you help me out with any reactions? I'm not able to see them while I'm sharing my screen.
Actually, I'm not seeing too many myself, so sorry.
Okay. A group of faculty want to travel. Is this an allowable cost? Well, the answer is no. Travel costs require prior written approval from the federal agency pursuant to 200.407. GEER awards do not have prior written approval. With that, I will turn things over to my colleague, Claudette Jenks. Claudette?
Hey, Ginger, I'm going to actually jump in for her. I don't think she was able to be with us today. So I'll go ahead and take the next scenario. Federal grant funds were advanced in full to an institution in the amount of $500,000. The institution deposits the grant award in interest-bearing accounts. The institution wants to use the interest generated to fund administrative costs tied to the grant award. Is this allowable? I see a couple of no's. All righty, and the answer is yes to an extent. The institution may retain up to $500 of earned interest to cover administrative costs. Any interest earned over $500 must be remitted to the federal government, and you can see section 200-305 for that. And I'm not sure who the next colleague is, but I'll turn it over to my next coordinating board colleague to do the next scenario.
Thank you, Tina. That would be me. Good morning. My name is John Denning, Director of the Education Data Center. For this scenario, an institution receives a grant award to develop an innovative new certificate program. Parts of the grant program involves recruiting students into the program, and the institution is holding several information sessions for prospective students. Free food and drinks is a proven method to get prospective students to attend an information session. Is the purchase of food and drinks allowable? I see no in the chat, no in the chat. And that's correct. The answer is no. There is a very high burden of proof to show that paying for food and beverages with federal funds is necessary to meet the goals and objectives of the federal grant. When a grantee is hosting a meeting, the grantee should structure the agenda for the meeting so that there is time for participants to purchase their own food, beverages, and snacks. In addition, when planning a meeting, grantees may want to consider a location in which participants have easy access to food and beverages. While these determinations will be made on a case-by-case basis, there may be some circumstances where the cost would be permissible. It is likely that those circumstances will be rare. Grantees, therefore, will have to make a compelling case that the unique circumstances they have identified would justify these costs as reasonable and necessary. Refer to general principles slide earlier on what constitutes necessary and reasonable. Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Doug Brock.
Thank you all for running through those. I think those are some, common scenarios that we all get questions on, and hopefully that's helpful to go through those. So what I want to do now is go through, what happens when you need to make a change to your grant program or budget, and then go through okay, so what happens if we don't comply with this stuff? Where are the risks? So first of all, all of your programs require regular reporting, both programmatic reporting and financial reporting. not only are you expected to report at those times, but you're should be regularly and ongoing monitoring your grant program and documenting that grant program. And so anytime you become aware that there may be a change in your budget across categories that are in excess of 25%, either positive or negative, or a change in scope or objective of the grant, or changes in key personnel that are identified in your grant application, you are required by the Uniform Grant Guidance to submit a change request to us, to the coordinating board, for review. And those change requests have to be approved by us before you can move forward with them. So, and I just saw a question come up on that. No, it's actually 25% of the line item. So across a budget category, 25% across a budget category requires a request for change to be submitted and for approval. These should be rare. There's an expectation from grant guidance and in RFAs that you meet the budgetary requirements that you set out for. And you don't have to submit for under 25%. It's just, once you hit that 25% threshold, you need to request a change request. Please be aware that, anytime there are change requests, that does put up a flag, and that may result in audit findings. It may require additional monitoring requirements be placed on your grant award. And there may be modifications to your grant award and the amount of the award based on a change request. So, the Uniform Grant Guidance doesn't prohibit it. It does frown on the use of change requests, and it does set that threshold at 25%. And I see some more questions coming on that. We'll get to those at the end. So next slide, please. So I mentioned audits a little bit in the last slide. Please be aware that these are federal funds, so they fall under the federal single audit requirement. And you'll see it in Uniform Grant Guidance, but the audit requirements set forth for federal awards. But the audits of GEER funds are currently occurring, and they will be ongoing. These are both at the state and federal level. And those audits occurred, at the coordinating board and at your institution, because these are federal awards. So, if you look in your RFA, your grant agreement, it does have provisions in there on audit. Those are federally required provisions. Those detail your record retention that must be met, and that put you on notice that auditors may come at any time to audit your records related to this grant program. It's just, it's required for any federal award. It's nothing additional we're placing on anybody. We have to have it in there. So what you need to do is be prepared for that. We are ongoingly being prepared for that, making sure that on our end, we are documenting things properly. So please be aware, when we ask you for your reports, when we ask you to timely submit your reports, it is in part to help us with the ongoing audits, but it's also to assist you for the audits as well. So please follow your institution's documentation procedures and policies, maintain your records as set out in the RFA, and be organized. Like, auditors love it when files are organized and things are easy to find. So just make sure you have everything saved, kept in one location, so it's easy to find. You're not having to dig through things. Just ongoing organization is crucial. And please make sure that you are timely submitting your reports. I know the program staff is, communicating with you all regularly on when reports are due and when we need those. We're not trying to be difficult. we're trying to make sure that we're complying with the federal requirements of these grant awards, and that in turn helps you maintain compliance as well. So, it's mutually beneficial for all of us. So, please get that documentation right. Make sure you're, doing the time and effort keeping, and then submitting your reports on time. You can even submit them early if you want. So just get them in. Next slide, please. So what are the consequences? If y'all watch any of the short track, there's been a lot of it going on lately, but it takes one little slip up from one person and everybody's askew and everybody's falling all over the ice. So there are consequences if we aren't meeting the requirements in the RFA or the Uniform Grant Guidance. And so if unallowable costs are reported or uncovered during an audit, what will be required is you'll be required to refund those costs plus interest. You may have already spent it, but if it was unallowable, you'll have to refund it plus interest due. And it can result in termination of your grant award. It may result in a major finding in a federal audit, and that has ripple effects. So if you have a major finding in a federal audit, you will then be designated at high risk on future federal or state grant awards. So that requires even additional monitoring, and monitoring is a broad term that encompasses, training, reporting, looking at changes in key personnel on grants. And the federal government actually can come in and put in a corrective action plan as a result of a major finding on a federal audit. So, be aware of this. It's don't want to scare you, because if you're following the Uniform Grant Guidance, if you're following what's in the RFA, if you're doing your reporting, then that risk should be minimal, but you need to stay on top of it. Especially in this time where a lot of us are working remotely. There is an influx of funds, both from federal and state level. So just staying on top of it for all of them at all the same times is difficult. We get that. We're going through it. But the more you can stay organized on top of it, the safer you will be. Next slide. And so now I think we have a host of questions, and in honor of the Olympics, I'm going to don my USA headband, and we're going to be prepared to take on some of these questions now. So I'm going to turn it over to Ginger, who's going to assist us in going through your great list of questions. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat. And what we're going to do is we have saved substantial amount of time for these questions. We're going to get through as many as we can. Please, if you have program specific questions, please direct those to your specific program. And also be aware, in answering these questions, we can't provide you specific legal advice. So if you have a specific legal question, those should be directed to your legal counsel. But we'll do what we can to answer what you have here.
Thank you, Doug. So I'm looking at the questions now. Yes, we will be sharing this slide deck afterwards. Yes, we will be providing a link to the recording. Let's see. So if we have equipment in our approved budget and the project was approved, does that account as prior approval?
I'm on mute. Sorry about that. So I think that goes back to the prior approval requirement on capital, on construction, on real property, capital equipment. So it depends. If you have equipment in your approved budget, you're okay. That's not a prior approval thing. Prior approval cannot come from us. Prior approval is from the Department of Education or the governor. So, but keep in mind that that prior approval is for capital equipment. If you're talking about, if this refers to like laptops, soft, like any like IT equipment, that is not a capital equipment. Capital equipment is generally defined as something that is physically attached to the ground or to the building. And when you get into those things, like if you get into any of those, like the construction, the real property, the capital equipment, please be aware those are required prior approval anyways, but they also come with a whole host of other regulations you have to follow and, limitations. Like just for example, if we use federal grant awards to purchase real property, like land, the federal government has an ownership interest in that land because you're using federal dollars for it. And there's an entire process for the grantee to own it outright. You have to do a lot of work with whoever the federal agency is, and there's limitations on the sale and use of that property as well. For construction, any construction work, and that doesn't fall within any of our GEER awards, but for construction that requires compliance with the Davis-Bacon Act, which is federal prevailing wage rates. There's a whole host of other things that come into play with those. But if you're talking about just general IT equipment, that is not capital equipment that requires prior approval.
I think there was another question about if there's software approved as a line item, could different kinds of software be purchased? Or does it have to be, would that require some sort of special request? That would apply to any line item, I guess. If something is requested in a line item and is approved in the NOGA, but then the institution realizes they need a variety of that line item, would that work?
I would recommend, reach out to the program lead on that. But generally the requirements for a change request is like major changes to your program or activities and goals, or 25% or more in cost categorization. So that generally would probably be allowable, but you want to be in communication with the program lead on that to make sure that you're all in agreement, you all understand what's being done.
I have a few questions about logistics, like what is my reporting schedule? How would I find additional information regarding the parameters of the grant? So I think as well, Doug, I'll just let you answer.
So that goes back to the very beginning. The things that you should always have and go to review is the RFA, your grant award, and the notice of grant award. Your reporting schedule is going to be in there. All of the RFAs have a reporting schedule in there. Please be aware that reporting schedule can be modified in the NOGA. So in your notice of grant award, there may be, changes to the reporting schedule. Always look there. And if there were any amendments to the RFA, it may be there. I also know that the program staff have been very diligent in reaching out to all the grantees on when reports are due, but that's where you can find it. Like that's where you're going to find the interest. Almost everything is in that RFA, any amendments to the RFA, and in the notice of grant.
We have a question about indirect costs. Are they allowable and what percent?
So under the Uniform Grant Guidance, indirect costs are permitted. The limits on them are your negotiated federal indirect cost rate So you can have a negotiated indirect cost rate that you negotiate that with the Department of Education. It has, and those have an expiration. So it has to be a currently valid negotiated indirect cost rate. If you don't have one, or it has expired, then it's up to the de minimis of 10%. Keep in mind that with the GEER funds, the focus on them is for direct response to the COVID-19 pandemic and all the tentacles that spread out across, every facet of our lives, and working to recover from those. So the goal is to use those funds for program specific purposes. And our goal is to try to limit those indirect costs as much as possible.
We have a few questions about a report template and whether or not one would be provided.
Report templates are specific to each grant award, and those are provided by the program staff. So if you can't find yours, if you have a grant or grants right now, and you want what the current templates are, reach out to the program staff. At the end of this, we're going to share, once again, so you have it, all the email addresses for each grant program. You can reach out to them and ask for the template.
If a grant program provides financial aid for students using GEER funds, are DACA students eligible?
That is a program specific question. It's going to be addressed in the RFA on what the requirements are for financial aid. But if you have a question after reviewing the RFA, I recommend you reach out to the program.
I think we have some other program specific questions. For example, if travel wasn't pre-approved, can it be approved?
No. Travel, so at this point, once again, the coordinating board has no authority to provide prior approval. That has to come from the Department of Education or the governor. The process to do that would take so much time that you don't have enough time at this point. With the GEER funds, I guess I should have talked about this earlier, but there's an expiration on the use of these GEER funds. If you look, most of your grant awards are going to say they expire September 30th, 2022. The reason for that is not an arbitrary date. It's a requirement. Like, we have to have the GEER funds have to be expended no later than August 23rd, 2022. Now, once again, remember, coordinating board is a subrecipient of that. So the coordinating board has a hard deadline from the governor's office of September 30th that we have to have all the funds accounted for by September 30th, report that to the governor. Any funds that aren't expended by that date will have to be returned to the federal government. So we have a very short timeline for the use of these funds. There's no indication that the Department of Education is going to provide any prior approval for travel. They've been pretty specific in their guidance that they're not providing any additional prior approval. And that would actually have to go from the Department of Education, from the governor's office through the Department of Education for that prior approval.
There was a question that happened during real time when your presentation says, what constitutes significant findings? Any examples? I believe they're referring to the audit findings.
Yeah. So a major finding on a federal award, unallowable costs are a huge one. Failure to report is another. Misuse of funds. Just, you've stated you're going to do X with your program, and you don't have any documentation to back it up, or you're not complying with your own institution's policies, procedures. For example, like any of those scenarios, like if you decide that you're going to pay, we're going to pay fringe benefits, we're going to give everybody, a $10,000 stipend just because they've been working hard. That's going to be a major finding. Like anything that would go against your institution's policy procedures, anything that would be unnecessary for the use of the grant award. Like if you decided to, I get it. Like I would love to use the funds to have a giant ice cream social and get all y'all together and, celebrate all the hard work we're doing. But, the federal government would frown on that. And that would be a major finding. Any of those, like any misuse of the funds is going to be a major finding.
So one specific example about changing what was in the NOGA, one grantee planned on using grant dollars for student workers, but there wasn't enough time during the grant period. But since that money was earmarked for student salaries, could they be used for salaries for staff instead?
I would recommend you put in a change request on that. That's a change in your program. That seems pretty substantive change in your program. You would want to get approval on that.
Another similar question, faculty summer salaries are programmed into the grant. Faculty are on a 9-month contract. Can the grantee include legitimate faculty labor costs expended during the spring as part of summer labor costs retroactively?
I don't know if I fully understand that question. I think that I'd recommend reach out to program on that, but I don't think I fully follow the question. On the part of faculty time spent on a grant project, as long as it's allocable, yes, that is an allowable cost. So if it's that, the faculty are on 9 months, they're going to work an additional 2 months over the summer. And so, yeah, like if that time they spend in the summer is solely devoted to the grant program, then that 2 months of salary and benefits, could be an allowable cost to the program. What I'm not quite following is the piece on the spring, but I hope that helps to answer the question.
We have a couple of questions about program level, academic program level. So if you need to add a program to your project, does that need to be approved? And is there a form? And similarly, if a university has funds allocated across programs, does each program report on their fund separately, or does the institution need to aggregate their reporting as an institution level for the purposes of the grant?
If you have some of y'all have multiple grant awards right now. Each one is going to have its own reporting schedule, and you need to report specifically on that grant award. You're not going to combine them. But there are some of the grants where, yeah, you're going to have work across multiple areas of your institution. And yeah, it gets difficult, but you're going to have to pull all that information, and that's going to be included in one report.
We have a question about eligible marketing costs. I think that's a program question for your program officer, specific to your grant. We have a question that says, can you clarify?
Yeah, Ginger, let me add a little on that. Yeah, so marketing is always specific, but please be aware that very similar to you know, the food scenario, swag. So, you know, you've developed this awesome program and you need to get the word out. And I mean, we know students, they love free stuff. Like they love free food. They love, like, you know, free pins, you know, all the, like, swag is not 99% of the time, it is not a necessary cost for the grant. So you can't use the grant funds to purchase swag. Sorry. Not me, federal government.
And this is a question we've had, there are similar versions ahead of this. Can you clarify the application of $500 that is available to otherwise eligible students regardless of need? And I'm not sure if this is specific to a program, but or if perhaps you mentioned this during your presentation, because the second question we have about $500.
So the only reference to $500 that I recall was regarding earned interest. And so going back to that, if you are advanced grant funds, you are required to put that in an interest-bearing account. Now, that interest that you earn, you can retain $500 of it, cap of $500 of earned interest for administrative costs related to the grant. Any interest earned over $500 must be returned to the Department of Education. You can't retain that other earned interest because you can't make money off of federal dollars.
Okay, so I think this question about $500 is available to otherwise eligible students may be program specific then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because there are, I know that, I mean, several of our current grants do allow for, you know, other costs up to $500. That's going to be a program specific question.
Right, okay. We have a question about the Texas Completion Repayment Grant and whether or not we know when institutions will be informed about those awards. I don't know if Suzanne is on the call.
I don't either. I think she may have had to jump off for another meeting, but
Okay.
I know that that is in process. You know, we appreciate your patience on it. But yeah, it's in the process right now.
Another general question, what is considered an administrative cost?
Good question. So administrative cost is anything that is necessary. It is for the administration of the grant. For example, like an administrative cost is the time it takes y'all to get those reports together. Like the reporting is actually not a part of your the program that you're funding through the grant. However, you're required to do it. And the time and effort spent in gathering all the information for the report is an administrative cost in running the program.
Okay, as I scroll down to see additional chats, I see that the completion grantees were already notified. So thank you for that,
Oh,
those of you who
awesome.
shared. I am at the end of the questions in the chat. I tried to select those that were generally applicable. I see that Carol Exum, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask a question? Apologies if I have mispronounced your name. Great. Carol said her question has been answered. Terrific. So at this point, we do have time left. I know I skipped over some questions again, trying to address those that are more general or more generally applicable. Jeffrey, I see you have your hand raised. Would you like to ask a question? Okay, I don't, Jeffrey, not hearing from you. I will return to the chat. Someone has asked, do they need approval from the Department of Ed or from the Office of the Governor? If you have,
So prior approval,
yeah,
that prior approval has to, it's going to flow down from the Department of Education because it's federal dollars. In certain, and I'm speaking too broadly, it's not necessarily specific to GEER, but if prior approval is required, there's two ways prior approval can generally be obtained. It can come from the Department of Education, which is the, or whoever is the federal entity funding the grant, or from the pass-through entity, which in this case would be the Office of the Governor. For the GEER specific grant, those do require prior approval from the Department of Education. And the way the Department of Education has provided prior approval in GEER is actually through the grant award. So, and that is the general approach by the federal agencies on prior approval, is that they write the prior approval into the grant award itself. So for example, the biggest example of prior approval in GEER is those pre-award costs. So generally, costs you incurred prior to getting the grant award, you cannot use the grant award to pay for those pre-award costs. However, GEER specifically has it written into it that the Department of Education is allowing pre-award costs dating back to March 13, 2020 for use of GEER funds. And you go, yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear why. In the case of, okay, we're trying to recover from COVID-19, educational institutions incurred tons of costs in, moving from in-person to online, back to in-person and masks and testing and all those kind of things. So the Department of Education said, okay, yeah, like we're going to help you with some of those costs you incurred prior to a grant award to help offset those. But so that's the general approach to prior approval.
I have another question related to change. If the grant agreement allocated a certain amount for marketing and we don't end up spending that much on marketing, do we need to do a change request in order to use those funds for direct student awards instead?
Can you run that by me again?
So if the grant allocated at a certain amount for marketing and we don't end up spending that much on marketing, do we need to submit a change request in order to use those funds for student awards instead?
If it amounts to 25% or more, yeah, you would. If it's under 25%, or, for example, you're going to use, 80% of it on marketing, you have 20% left over that you want to use in another line item, no change request is required. It's just if it's 25% or more.
25% of the total grant or 25% of that line item?
Of that line item.
So again, I was trying to filter out questions in the chat that were generalizable across grants. If you have, we do have some time. If you'd like to ask more specific questions, we can try to address those. Jeffrey, would you like to ask your question? Your hand is still raised. So I think there was an earlier question related to dual credit students and asking, is there a scenario where dual enrollment students could be eligible for a particular grant? And I'm assuming that would be specific to the program officer for that grant.
It would.
Okay.
And I did notice that there was like the $500 was referring to, I believe, the reskilling grant. Yeah, the $500 for cost of attendance in addition to funding towards tuition and fees based on student eligibility. Yeah, that is in the reskilling grant. You can go back to the RFA for more specifics on that, or if you need clarification, reach out to Sherry. And I know she'd be happy to assist with that. And we're gonna maybe, if you want to go, do you want to go ahead and post all those email addresses so everybody can see them?
Yes, I'll do that.
Awesome.
And then another question, do non-credit students need to apply to FAFSA in order to get student support through a grant?
So once again, that's going to be program specific. I can speak generally that for many of the grant awards, and once again, this is program specific, so I'm speaking just generally, most of the grant awards that allow for any student aid, those type of thing, require the student to have applied for the FAFSA or the TASFA, either one. But almost all of them have that requirement. But once again, if reach out to that specific program for clarification on that. I see a good question on, are extensions or no cost extension requests allowed? So if you read the RFA, there is going to be language in there saying that, there may be opportunities for extension. The problem we run into that I tried to explain is that we have a hard deadline of September 30th, 2022. We can't extend beyond that date. Most of the current grant awards run right up to that date. So there is no opportunity. We don't have the legal authority to extend beyond that date at this point. And like, for example, I know with like the earlier reskilling rounds that we got an extension on that date. So that date has been extended. Initially, I believe it was June. Now it's September, but we're doing what we can on those, but it's September 30th, 2022. There won't be any extensions beyond that for these current grant awards.
Any other questions from attendees? We scheduled 90 minutes for this call to make sure that everyone had an opportunity to ask questions, and it appears we are at the point where everyone has had that opportunity. So thank you for joining us today. We will hang on, staff will hang on for a few minutes longer in case anyone wants to ask a question. But otherwise, if you feel like your questions have been answered, we invite you to drop off, and thank you again for your time, and really wishing you all the best with your grant activities.
And I really appreciate all of you, all your hard work, and just keep in mind, we're all here for the same purpose. It's to help the students. And if we do right by the students and, assist them through everything that's going on right now, it's best for the institutions and it's best for us. It's best for the state and it's best for the country. So appreciate your time. Ginger's going to post those email addresses on here so you all have access to them, but also be aware that they're on our website. They're in your RFA. It's a good resource to have. Thank you all.
We did just have a question pop up. We were awarded a grant through 4 semesters beyond any September 30 date. Should I contact DC?
If it's a coordinating board grant, reach out to us. If it's another federal agency, there's probably other requirements set forth in it. Now, here's a good one. Any best practice tips on what to keep organized in case of an audit. So my recommendation is to first work with your own internal auditors on, as an auditor, what they'd be looking for. What I can tell you is that it's best to keep an electronic file for each specific program. And in that, you're going to have all your time and effort record keeping. You're going to have a copy of the RFA. You're going to have a copy of the NOGA. You're going to have a copy of, you know, all the key personnel that are identified in your application. You're going to want to make sure that your financial records are in there on the use of the funds, all the reports you submitted to the coordinating board. You know, those are things that should be in there, and then you can have them organized, like have them separately organized in subfiles.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry for the sound issues. I seem to have fixed them. I was the one who had the question about labor costs incurred in the spring, if they could be charged subsequently in the summer. We have faculty, three months of total faculty time programmed into my grant. It is programmed in for the summer. If the faculty work during the spring, can we subsequently charge it during the summer? No double dipping, just charging it later than it was actually incurred.
So you need to report on like when the costs were incurred and paid. So if you are, I mean, if the faculty,
Let me jump in here. I think,
Yeah.
Jeffrey, your grant is an accelerating credentials of purpose and value grant. I
Okay.
believe.
Yes, it is. I'm sorry.
Right, yeah. So the costs that you've associated, or you put in your budget for faculty time, if the timing of the payments change, it doesn't really matter. But what I think Doug was about to say was, you're going to be reporting how much you've expended by a particular date to us. And so you're going to have to, at the end of the day, at the end of the grant period is September 30th, all the numbers have to add up in terms of the costs you had for faculty, but you're not really changing anything, you're just changing the timing.
Yes, exactly.
That'll have an influence on your report, on when you report what, but I don't believe it requires a change request.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
yeah, no, that wouldn't require a change request. And you also just want to make sure that you're, like, what you're reporting to us is, you know, on your institution's financial records, it's the same.
Right.
Great. I appreciate it.
Right. What if the auditors ask for your general ledger? Your general ledger should reflect what you've reported to us.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
I don't see any new questions in the chat. If someone's hand is raised, please let me know. Well, thank you for staying on the call. Again, we will be sharing these slides and we will be posting the link to this recording. And we have all of your email addresses. Thank you for registering, and we'll be able to share that with you directly. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for all your talent and working on these grants and in service to students. We will, again, staff will hang on for a few moments, but you're invited to drop off if you have gotten what you need from this session.
Hello,
Hi,
this is Brenda Martinez.
hi Brenda.
Hi, how are you all? This was
Well-
great information. I do have a question, and this is more related to student availability, eligibility. Hopefully you can help me. We applied for the True Grant, and the purpose of our application is to provide non-credit programs for non-credit students, okay? So our programs do not require financial aid. Financial aid does not pay for these programs regularly. So we apply for this grant in order to cover the tuition and fees expenses associated with these programs, okay, with these non-credit programs. So my question is, do students need to apply for financial aid and qualify or demonstrate need in order to receive this funding or this assistance?
Right. So this is very program specific, Brenda, and I'm happy to respond to your question. First question is, your institution's processes for determining financial aid or providing financial aid is at the discretion of your institution. So we're not dictating to you how you're going to organize or distribute financial aid. Continuing education students in non-credit courses or non-credit students are eligible for funding under TRUE. So you can use your TRUE grant for financial aid for those students. How you determine their eligibility is based, all the eligibility requirements are in the RFA for a student. And even if they are not a regular student, they still need to fill out a FAFSA, for example.
Okay.
But that's the bottom line for eligibility. Whether they are credit or non-credit students or in a credit or non-credit program doesn't matter. But your institution has to figure out how to handle that, because I know institutions are not always set up to support continuing education students with financial aid.
Yes. Okay, that was pretty much my question. Thank you so
Cool.
much. Thank you.
Problem.
We have another great question from Cindy, not trying to call you out, Cindy. She asked if we'd be posting a presentation and the slide deck to the web. We haven't talked about that, but we will discuss it internally and figure out a way to, there's a way for us to do that. So we will discuss and explore. Well, thank you again, everyone. We are down to a single page of attendees. So I'm going to invite everyone to drop off, and I'm going to officially end this session. So thank you again. Again, reach out to your program officer if you have any additional questions.
They're awesome people.